Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm so delighted to be here. I came to Stellenbosch in South Africa for the first time 20 years ago for my honeymoon. And now I'm here for my other love, science communication. So this is very special to me. So thank you so much, and thank you, Marina, and everyone for hosting this important meeting. I am here to talk a little bit about the origins of SciPEP, which I hope provides some framing for the day, the next 2 days. Let's see. I just need to figure it out. Is the remote the best thing? Sorry, bear with me one sec. Okay. This is a Mac user at a PC, and it makes no sense. What do you think?
I need to get out.
Oh, sorry. There we go. Thank you.
I know you should be able to.
With this one. Oh, that's much better. Thank you. Okay. Maybe we'll try this. Huh, sorry guys, it's still not working. Shouldn't this work though? Oh, here, the space bar works, I'll just do that. It's okay, it's okay. Okay, so an overview of what we'll chat about this morning. We're gonna talk about the SciPEP story, where we came from, why we did what we did, and some highlights, thank you Marina, from our booklet that is in your very beautiful bag, Insights and Practical Considerations for Communicating Basic Science. And then we'll have a bit of discussion about all of this. Okay, so some motivations to create SciPEP. The Kavli Foundation, where I have the pleasure of working, is a funder of basic science. We predominantly fund basic science in life sciences and physical sciences, and then we have a program in science and society. And I found myself at a Department of Energy communications meeting where they brought together the communicators from their national labs to talk about science communication. And in the United States, as you might know, the Department of Energy is one of our biggest, if not the biggest, funder of basic science in a federal agency in the US. And so now we had two funders of basic science in a room together with a lot of communicators, it was at Stanford, talking about how to communicate your science and what we know about science communication, social science of science communication, polling and focus group work about how people feel about science. And Rick was there at the time, and Allison and I all talked after the meeting with some of the presenters. And we realized that a lot of the things being presented at that meeting, which was sort of the best in show of what we know about science communication, things that are headlining science communication conferences, journals, we kind of sat back and said, is this even relevant to basic science? We're telling a lot of stories about community participation born in climate adaptation science and vaccine hesitancy, which is really a dominant narrative in the science communication world right now. And we were in a room full of folks working with theoretical physicists, mathematicians. And so then they start asking questions about, well, how do I engage my community in doing string theory, as if this is the new paradigm we must be doing? And we sort of stopped and thought, maybe we need to think a little bit more about what might some of these lessons mean for basic science, and what do we know about basic science? And I appreciate that Rick earlier today and over the break I've had a number of conversations about, does it even matter that it's basic science? Is this like a continuum or dichotomy that we've engineered, which is something that Bruce speaks to in our booklet, and we'll talk about a bit. I think for the purposes of what we decided to do and for this conference, it might not matter in terms of how we think about strategic science communication, needing goals and audiences and relevance. But when you talk to someone who works in physics about how working with your community on climate adaptation is the gold standard of public engagement, we're missing something and we're disconnecting. So we launched on a journey together. We decided for the next 4 to 5 years, our private foundation and our public funder would learn what we could about basic science communication so we could bring better, more relevant stories to the people doing that work. So we formed in 2019, and this is actually the end of SciPEP. It was never meant to be a new thing in perpetuity. It was meant, as Rick said, to be the down payment on laying a foundation of what do we really understand, and now we hope these conversations, when we go to science communication conferences, basic science is now part of those communications, not a separate track and a separate thing, but that we're spotlighting it a bit more and looking at what some of those differences might be. I want to acknowledge really quickly our SciPEP team. So Rick, who was at DOE when this started and has since retired, was instrumental in getting this started and off the ground. Allison, who's there, has been there since the beginning and is now, as Rick said, his successor at DOE. And at the Kavli Foundation, I really appreciate, Marina, your appreciation of the Kavli Foundation this morning and myself, but it's not me. It's a whole team, and we are a whole group at our foundation. And our Science and Society team, it's myself and Lauren Budenholzer, who is here, and I hope you have a chance to talk to her. Can you raise your hand, Lauren? Hi, Lauren. And our colleague, Melina Fuentes, who's back in Los Angeles, and we've worked together really closely on this initiative. Okay, so here's where we started. The first thing we did was we said, let's go find what is in the literature about basic science. And our initial thinking was, once we find it all, a lot of this is just you can't find it in the publication challenge, that someone's probably studied it, it's in a journal, and it's just not been unleashed in a practical way to the world. So let's invest in some scholars to do some literature reviews to find this information, and then SciPEP will help make it more accessible, we'll make it relevant, we'll connect it to folks. So John Besley, who's here, and then Todd Newman at University of Wisconsin did this literature review, both in science communication literature, as well in literature from disciplinary journals that identifies basic science. And this is what they found, that essentially very, very little of our scholarly knowledge about science communication is in the context of basic science. So from a SciPEP perspective, our team sat back and said, well, I guess our charge is no longer better synthesizing what we know and making it accessible and making it more open to folks, but instead doing something totally different. Let's ask questions about what we should know, or are there people out there doing practice that just haven't published, that have stories that we should bring forward? So we went on a journey the next 4 years to really think through what are the questions, what are some new things we can learn that are foundational, and how can we set the course for how we can help this niche of folks who work with basic science and in the context of basic science communicate better? So that led to SciPEP's work. And so we talk about how, rather than summarizing and curating and sharing, instead we shifted to championing, catalyzing, and connecting. And this for us meant we were going to help elevate the idea that basic science is something that we should think about in a special context sometimes in science communication discussions and conferences and studies. We're going to catalyze hopefully new studies and new work that you all do, or new ways of studying the work you have been doing, or new ways of sharing the work you have been doing, so we can deepen our base of understanding amongst each other and then connect that with each other. So we did this in a number of ways in the past 4 years. We commissioned a few specific studies. The SciPEP team, as we learned about things, wrote insight papers and opinion pieces. We had 2 international virtual conferences. Over 60 countries were represented in those conferences, and over 1,000 people attended those virtual conferences. And that was really fascinating to us because we thought, we thought there'd be 100 people that came. And when 1,000 people registered for the first one, we thought, okay, other people might have these same questions we have and want to talk about this. And so what I'll share in the remainder of this presentation is some of the key insights that we've learned through all of these things. We have so much rich material and information. You can find it all on the SciPEP website. The URL is down in the corner there. There's now a resources page that just lists all of these things. Everything's open access. You can find everything. And then we did take the very Herculean task this past year of trying to synthesize it into a short little booklet, which is in your bag. Maybe not so short, but it's very rich and full of context. And even going through that process of what have we learned that's important to share back and to help lead to this platform of catalyzing is going to be important is in that booklet. I'm going to share a few highlights to me of what we learned in this presentation, which I hope set the stage a bit from some of our discussions. I also want to acknowledge that we sat in a place at SciPEP of asking some of these questions, commissioning work, asking other people to come share their stories in conferences, lead sessions, and now I'm reflecting back to you things that I heard, which is honestly quite difficult because I'm not an expert in anything I'm about to share with you. These are just my perspectives of the things that were important, interesting, and relevant to some conversations to move on. Many of the people whose work is in here are in this room today, so if you have questions about it, you need to ask them, not me. And some of them I hope are online that couldn't make it here, but there's a rich amount of thinking and ideas that have surfaced from this. So these are the couple things that I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes to set this stage. And I also want to say that in addition to this booklet being available online as an online PDF, all of these slides are available online as well. So if you go do presentations about basic science and want to talk about these things, you can just grab these slides and use them in your presentation yourself. They're also open access and on our website. Okay, so one of the first things that we dived into and felt was important to share in our summary is this idea of what do we know about funding and support for basic science. In our booklet, this is a very US-focused perspective, not because we want to only talk about the US for this, but we're using this as an example. So one of the things we hear in the US from basic scientists when they go out and communicate their science or their professional communicators who work with them do, they often are led with this idea of, since basic science receives no more funding anymore, since basic science never gets funded, we should X, we should Y. And this is something that we reflected on in terms of just good communication is, are you even starting from an accurate base of information? And so the story we've told in our booklet is a snapshot today of funding and support for basic science. It's a very complicated and complex issue, and it changes all of the time. But we also know, for example, that like in the US, 88% of adults agree that scientific research that advances knowledge deserves federal funding. So when you start your discussions about basic science with, since nobody cares, since nobody's funding it, which is often a feeling within the scientific community, you should just check your assumptions before you move forward in some of your communication. So this is a really important insight we had, that there seems to be a disconnect between some narratives being perpetuated by the scientific community and what we really know about how people feel or support science. Then we dug into goal setting. So one of the things that I said that I want to reiterate is communicating basic science is not different than communicating science, communicating applied science, communicating anything. The rules of communication still apply. But what we wanted to understand is, are there differences when you apply those rules when you're doing this work? And so this first question of goal setting. So what are the goals that scientists or communicators who identify with basic science have when communicating basic science? Are those different than other areas of science, or are they same? So we worked with John, who's in the back of the room here, and John has a talk about this on Wednesday, right? Yes. So I will only just briefly say that one of the things that John found in this with Anthony Dudo is that scientists who identify in fields that do basic science tend to not prioritize their goals that much. So the data he has, and it's in the booklet, shows that all the goals are kind of prioritized about the same. So the goal setting strategy still remains. However, one of the things that we've seen, and I heard this anecdotally and from my experience with working with basic scientists in science communication, is they have a really hard time really articulating that goal. It's very high level. Like, I want to communicate because it's important, because it's cool, because people should know what I'm doing. Oh, it's curiosity. And then they feel like, okay, I said curiosity, check, I've gotten there, that's the goal. And so we kind of want to challenge that and then think deeply about how to work more with goal setting when you're doing things in the basic science context. We also talked a lot during the SciPEP journey about the semantics of basic science. And does the term even matter or mean anything? This is important because also I think in our discussions with the scientists who identify as basic scientists or doing some part of their work in basic science, they think it's super important to say, I do basic science and make that distinction. So we've pulled from multiple studies and talked about what resonates with folks. The word basic in the US and US context means it's simple and remedial science, which is frustrating to scientists who do it, but it's just another reminder of what are some things we can do to better think through how to connect with people on what basic science really means to you as a scientist. There's been some work done that shows these concepts of hope and hope from the public side and joy from the science side is maybe better to open doors and find that connection and relevance to folks. And I wanted to just dig into this a little bit. This was work that was done by first Science Counts, and then there was an additional study, and there is a really rich couple pages in your booklet about this idea of how audiences and scientists identify with different goals and terms. And this work has shown that, for the most part, members of the public are looking for the results of science. They're looking for hope. Whereas scientists who are doing science really associate their work with joy. And what Chris Volpe, the head of Science Counts, talks about is, joy is very process-minded. Lots of scientists like doing science, not because of some hopeful thing that they might do, because many folks might not even achieve that in their career. It might be work they do that someone else builds on. But it's the day-to-day of doing science. Going into the field, going into nature, going into a lab and doing science, the process of science. But the public is very hope-minded. What's the payoff going to be? How is that going to matter? Why is that going to matter for me? And then they went through and actually looked at how different disciplines in science identify with these different terms and found the kind of disciplines that are more in that basic science camp, physics, math, biology, are even more process-minded, and that public audiences live in the hope camp. And so this is just another reminder in the frame of good strategic science communications. What are your frames? What are your audience's frames? Are they different? And whether or not you need to become more hopeful or they need to become more joyful is up for discussion, but it's something that just needs to be thought through a bit more, perhaps, when we're communicating in these contexts of basic science. We also talked about whether or not, of course, this term even matters, and whether or not it's important to make distinctions between basic science and not. And generally, what we see is no, it's not important when you're talking to folks. And so many of the things that we discussed and learned about in unpacking this is it matters to the scientists and how you then approach your work, but can you leave that term at the door sometimes and to really challenge that thinking? And like I had mentioned too, there's a really great essay in the book by Bruce, who's sitting right there, about why he doesn't use the term basic science and the kind of the political construct that was created around it, not a scientific one. And Bruce, I just want to say that I'm so glad that you even came to this meeting with a title that has a term that you reject, and it just shows your open-mindedness to thinking through these things with us, and we're so grateful for that thought piece and your contributions to all of this. Thank you. Okay, so we also dug into this curiosity thing because we have heard so many times from scientists who do basic science that why they want to do this and share it is because it's curiosity. And it's almost like curiosity has become this protected area, this protected class of communication that it's not going to be controversial if it's about curiosity. And this curiosity is this, very homogeneous, benign thing that no one can touch, and it's curiosity, and let's just go, it's curiosity, it doesn't matter. So we wanted to ask some questions about curiosity. And turns out, and I think this is something that I hope continues through the science communication community, there is rich scholarship and understanding and learning about curiosity and awe for decades that often is not brought into our conversations about science communication. Over the course of our couple years at SciPEP, we invited in a number of experts who study curiosity. Tanya Lombroso, who's at Princeton, came and talked to us about this. And she talked about what makes people curious and how we understand curiosity. This idea of curiosity being contagious, and you kind of get a foot in the door with curiosity, and then more curiosity grows from that. And also this idea that what knowledge is useful is in the eye of the beholder. And this is something that I think we all talked about at SciPEP that is often left out. When we hear a scientist say, it's because I'm curious, you should not assume that also makes your audience curious. Like, your curiosity is not the same as someone else's curiosity. And so unpacking that, I think, is really important in how we communicate basic science. And same with awe. So Daniel Silva Luna, who's done work in this, came and talked to us a number of times. And he talked about awe in terms of how there are so many interesting aspects of awe. And sometimes when we hear from scientists, especially who study astronomy, they're like, it's awe. It's this wonderful thing. And it's communicated as wonder. But what Daniel told us and pulled from his work and others' work is, awe can actually sometimes be really sad. It can sometimes be melancholy. It can be dark. It can feel yucky. Awe can be really scary. And so using these terms like curiosity and awe, like I said, as homogeneous ideas, really does a disservice then to your strategic communication around basic science. And then we also talked a lot about relevance, and I'm just going to blow by this because we have Monica here who gave her keynote this morning, and Rick's comments talked about this too. But I do think a really big area that we need to explore moving forward in basic science communication is expanding the idea of relevance to, yes, include utility when that works for that audience, but not getting, as Rick said, backed into the corner of utility, which happens over and over again. I spent a lot of time as a science communication trainer with scientists, and when I would work with applied scientists, they would quickly be able to put together, here are my goals, here are my messages, here's what I'm trying to do, and basic scientists would say, I can't do this. This has nothing to do with my science. When you ask me to think about goals and why it matters to people, that's not why I do science. I don't do science to cure cancer. I do science because I'm interested in the process, and in fact rejected many tools of strategic science communication. And I think that if we can open up doors that Monica's now alluding to around relevance being all kinds of different ways to connect to people's identities and lived experiences, that can open whole new doors for how we connect around basic science. So what's next? So for SciPEP, this is it. We're here to work with you and talk with you about where we go and what questions are out there. And we hope that these different conversations can stay in the science communication environment and discussions. We know that there are more questions than answers. And so our booklet raises some of the insights we've come up with. It puts some of the questions out. Sarah Yo, who's here, is going to join us on the panel, has a wonderful piece in the booklet about what some of that research agenda might look like and where we might go. And so I hope those are things we can pursue together. We also know that there's so much good work happening to communicate basic science and in the context of basic science. And we as a community need to do more to share those stories, get those stories in places where they're accessible by others. Because this was a big thing that we heard, is just because there's only 5% of the literature that represents this doesn't mean only 5% of the practice that's happening is about basic science. We know there's a lot of great work being done by many of you in this room, and so we want to learn from you and hear those stories. So we are very grateful to Maria and Stellenbosch University to create this platform to think about where we might go. And I really look forward to the conversations to unpack these ideas and build on them. Thank you again for having me.